Hmm. Faithfully sharing value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally here with Book Talks. Today, we're diving into the start of Beethoven's biography, Part 2. The For Elisa we hear is a piece Beethoven composed for his beloved. In Part 1, we covered Beethoven's early life. He showed amazing music talent young and made a name early on under his dad's strict training. We followed young Beethoven from Bonn to Vienna, the music hub, where he started to shine in the scene. He was lucky for his time, but fate wasn't kind to him.
Deafness tortured him, but out of that pain, he created timeless masterpieces.
Now, in part 2, we'll cover Beethoven's middle and old age, his tragic romances, and the ups and downs of his later life in poverty. Finally, we'll look back on his life as a musician and how he changed the music world. Back in 1800, while battling deafness, Beethoven got caught up in a love affair that left a deep mark. She was Beethoven's piano student, the 16-year-old Countess Giulietta Guicciardi, known as Julie. Julie was pretty cute and decent at music, and Beethoven fell for her at first sight. Back then, Beethoven was a star in Vienna's music world, with lots of young women fans. Julie was thrilled and flattered when she heard Beethoven had a crush on her. He was a genius musician, she a gorgeous young aristocrat. They hit it off fast, flirting during piano lessons, lost in the sweet romance of music and love. In the heat of their romance, Julie gave Beethoven a locket with her picture as a love token, and he was over the moon. Later on, Beethoven popped the question, but Julie's folks said no, crushing him. In a letter to a pal, he wrote, "It's the first time I thought marriage might make me happy. Sadly, we're from different worlds. I won't marry now. I'll be tied up with work for ages." Back then, Julie and Beethoven marrying was unrealistic. If a noble lady married a commoner, she'd lose all her class perks. Plus, her kids wouldn't get titles. Hardly any noble ladies back then would ditch that, especially not for a guy like Beethoven. Famous and gifted? Sure, but broke, grumpy, and plain looking. And Beethoven kept his hearing issues hidden from Julie all along. In the end, due to their class gap, they parted ways. The noble lady followed her dad's orders and quickly married a count in a loveless, aristocratic marriage. Back then, Beethoven, tormented by deafness, was also hurt by love. He even wrote a will and nearly killed himself. But that heartbreak gave Beethoven his richest inspiration. In his grief, he composed the famous dedication for the Moonlight Sonata, which was dedicated to Julie. This was Beethoven's farewell to her. But Beethoven probably never forgot this love, because he always kept Julie's medal close to him. What we're hearing now is the Moonlight Sonata, created by Beethoven in 1802. Its opening is monotonous, lengthy, and lingering, an endless monologue that lays bare feelings of desolation and resentment. Within a year of its release, the Moonlight Sonata became a musical legend known all over Vienna. Its mythical status was set during Beethoven's own lifetime. Critics said this music has a melancholic yet mesmerizing vibe, something totally new. Plus, the fingering at the start of the Moonlight Sonata's movement is simple and easy to pick up, even for amateur pianists, which helped make this piece so popular. In 1804, the fervor of the French Revolution sweeping Europe also hit Vienna. After his heartbreak, lonely Beethoven got fired up by the revolutionary spirit of freedom and democracy. He imagined himself as a revolutionary ancient Roman, dreaming of a heroic republic built by the god of victory. How long did... And that so-called god of victory was the first consul of France back then. Filled with this revolutionary passion, Beethoven started composing grand works like the Heroic Symphony and other glorious narrative songs. Actually, Beethoven never saw war firsthand, but as mentioned in Part 1, on his way from Bonn to Vienna, he ran into armies, heard the chaos of marching troops, and Vienna was full of soldiers drilling with bugles and military tunes. After wars, streets were packed with wounded and dead soldiers, funerals and dirges everywhere. These scenes reappear in Beethoven's symphonies. At the same time, he drew from ancient heroes and war scenes, like Homer and the Trojan War. So, Beethoven's heroic themes are rich and imaginative. He aimed to honor his hero, Napoleon. However, in May 1804, student Ries showed up at Beethoven's apartment and brought some shocking news.
The puppet Senate of France just declared Napoleon the Emperor of France. For Beethoven, his hero totally collapsed.
He clearly realized that the revolutionary dream was over. Once, Napoleon was the only one who could make it happen. Now the revolution's dead. This hero he saw as a liberator was really just after power and fame. Now, for his own ambition, he tramples all human rights, turning into a tyrant who only brings war.
Furious, Beethoven ripped off the symphony's cover, tore it in half, and threw it on the floor.
Luckily, Beethoven didn't give up on this symphony. When it was published in 1806, he changed the title to Eroica Symphony, composed to honor a great man. This was the title he came up with after deep thought. The so-called great man was the supreme image Napoleon should have been for Beethoven and many Europeans. But this imagined hero is in the grave. Not just a hero's death, but this symphony marks the end of the revolutionary dream. This Eroica Symphony redefined music's essence and power. More musicians, listeners, and critics called it unprecedented, magnificent, astonishing, sublime, revolutionary music. Many listeners linked the Eroica Symphony to the French Revolution spirit. Just as Beethoven dove into revolutionary creation, his second love came unexpectedly. In 1806, he fell in love with a Hungarian countess named Therese von Brunswick and got engaged. Therese had been Beethoven's student too. She said she'd loved him since he first came to Vienna. Beethoven was friends with Therese's brother. When he first came to Vienna, her brother invited him to teach Therese piano. But back then, they were just teacher and student. In 1806, when Beethoven visited Therese's home in Hungary again, they started to fall in love. About these happy days, Therese had this memory. After dinner on a Sunday evening, under the moonlight, Beethoven sat at the piano. First, he laid his fingers flat and stroked the keys back and forth. I know this habit of his. He often starts like this. Then, he played a few chords in the bass part, and then slowly, with a mysterious and solemn expression, he played a song. Here Foulet translated the lyrics as, "If you wish to offer a pure heart, pass it quietly, mutual affection, unknown to others, full of poetic charm." In a peaceful and happy life, Beethoven composed his Fourth Symphony. This piece is like a pure flower, holding the fragrance of Beethoven's relatively calm days. The spirit of compromise in love changed his behavior, mannerisms, and lifestyle. Friends said he was in high spirits, lively-minded, and became polite in dealing with people. He was patient even with people he disliked, dressed more elegantly, and cleverly hid it from everyone, even making people overlook his deafness. For example, he would read lips during conversations. When others called him and he didn't respond, he would explain that he was immersed in creation. People around him said he was in good health, except for some nearsightedness. However, this relationship didn't last long. In 1810, the couple ultimately didn't stay together, but they loved each other until death. What exactly caused this loving pair to separate? Perhaps it was still the difference in wealth and status. Perhaps the woman demanded that Beethoven keep their love a secret from the outside world, which made him feel humiliated and led him to rebel. Perhaps Beethoven's violent, sickly nature and hatred of humanity subtly showed, confusing his lover. In short, the engagement was ruined. However, neither forgot this love. Countess Therese even remained unmarried for life. According to close friends, she loved Beethoven until her last breath, and Beethoven kept this love buried deep in his heart. Therese once gave her portrait to Beethoven, inscribed with, "To the rare genius, great artist, kind person." In Beethoven's later years, a friend accidentally found him alone, embracing this portrait, crying and talking loudly to himself. Later, Beethoven experienced several romances with noble students, but all ended without result due to class and wealth disparities. His love life was tumultuous. He remained unmarried for life, and the impulse of love gave him more inspiration for his musical works.
For example, his famous For Elise was written when he was nearly 40, in pursuit of a noblewoman named Therese.
Hearing this, someone might ask, why is the score dedicated to Therese called Für Elise when it was clearly meant for Therese? This stems from a mistake made by later generations. At that time, this score remained with Therese. Beethoven didn't keep a copy. It wasn't until the 1860s that people discovered the manuscript of this piece among Therese's belongings. In 1867, when publishing the score of this piece, a careless publisher mistakenly wrote Für Elise instead of Für Therese, and since then, the work has been widely known as Für Elise around the world. Now, let's move to part 2, the ups and downs of Beethoven's later life and his death. Starting in 1810, the wars and revolutions in Europe changed. After Napoleon declared himself Emperor of France, he began authoritarian rule and launched large-scale invasion wars.
Beethoven was extremely indignant about Napoleon's betrayal of the Free Republican Revolution and his subsequent invasion of European countries.
In 1812, Napoleon's attack on Moscow failed, and European nations united in 1813. On June 21st at Vittoria, they fought Napoleon's army. General Wellington of Britain led the British Expeditionary Force to crush the French army, speeding up the fall of Napoleon's dictatorship.
The news of victory quickly reached Beethoven's ears. Inspired by General Wellington's victory, he started composing a new symphony with great emotion.
This piece, named Battle Symphony or Wellington's Victory, was created under the influence of the victory in the Independence War. Afterward, he also wrote A Soldier's Chorus, The Rebirth of Germany, for the capture of Paris, completing a choral piece. In 1814, he even conducted a patriotic song, The Glorious Moment, in front of many monarchs. At that time, Beethoven's other works weren't doing well, but these timely patriotic pieces became famous, bringing him great renown. Not only did he gain the respect of the people, but he also befriended many princes and nobles, was called the Glory of Europe, and was even invited to become the tutor to Archduke Rudolph. Oh. He finally had a stable annuity income. This came from several music-loving nobles who paid him an annuity, allowing this musical genius to live and create in Vienna without worrying about financial losses from his musical activities. However, after all the glory and fame, what followed was the lowest point of his life. Simply put, Beethoven started to fall into poverty. In the first decade of the 19th century, wars and Napoleon's punitive reparations caused severe inflation, and the government devalued paper money to 1/5 of its original value. Back then, Beethoven's daily living costs had risen almost tenfold compared to 1795. By 1817, inflation had hit nearly 40 times. This was devastating for Beethoven, who depended on a fixed income. His annuity was originally paid by several noble dukes, but they too were facing bankruptcy. The annuity payments became irregular. To make things worse, after the Vienna Congress in 1814, Vienna's character changed. Society shifted its focus from art to politics, and people's musical tastes evolved too. According to Romain Rolland, musical tastes were corrupted by Italian styles. The trend turned to Italian opera, and people started admiring composers like Rossini. And Beethoven began to be seen as outdated by the fickle Viennese. It can be said that Vienna never truly liked Beethoven, this ugly, irritable musician, a proud and independent genius like him. In this frivolous capital, he was unpopular, especially during this turbulent time. Many of Beethoven's friends and noble patrons had scattered or died. In a note from 1816, Beethoven wrote, "I have no friends, alone in the world." It was also then that he became completely deaf. From then on, the completely deaf Beethoven lost his reputation, friends, and stable annuity in Vienna. Under terrifying inflation, he worried about money for survival, exhausting the no longer young Beethoven. Oh! In 1818, at age 48, he wrote, "I've almost reached the point of begging, yet I have to pretend." Pretending daily life wasn't hard. Beethoven was reduced to scrambling for his livelihood. Composing each piece took him 3 months, but it only earned him 30 to 40 ducats. Ducats, also called ducat coins, were a currency popular in medieval Europe. One ducat was about 3.56 grams of gold. A piece earned him 30 ducats, which converts to roughly 4,000 Chinese yuan at today's gold prices, 2,000. To make matters worse, the powerful Prince Galitzin at court demanded he compose a quartet. This was perhaps Beethoven's most exhausting and arduous time, as if the work was written with blood and tears. As a result, he didn't get a single penny. Coupled with daily poverty, the exhausting creation, and endless lawsuits to make others fulfill financial promises, it almost suffocated Beethoven. Misfortune never comes alone. Beethoven's younger brother Karl died of lung disease, leaving a son whom Beethoven treated as his own. Beethoven intended to guide him onto the path of higher education, however. After Beethoven planned countless bright futures for him, the nephew remained ungrateful, frequenting casinos and accumulating debts. So, this prodigal defended his self-indulgent downfall like this: "Because my uncle wants me to improve, I become even more depraved."
It is said that in 1826, he even impulsively shot himself in the head.
However, he didn't die. Instead, Beethoven was worn out by his treatment, costing him half his life. But what is admirable is that in such a pit of sorrow, Beethoven still sang of joy. He said this was his lifelong plan as an enlightener. He wanted to sing of joy all his life, making joy the finale of one of his works in the form of an ode, and deciding which work to place it in. With these questions he pondered all his life, ultimately giving birth to the Ninth Symphony. This symphony, the choral part of the fourth movement, uses the poem Ode to Joy by the famous German poet Friedrich Schiller as lyrics, and this composed section is the most famous fragment. In the Ode to Joy, joy descends from heaven wrapped in an unreal tranquility. It soothes pain with a gentle breath. When it slips into the heart of someone recovering from a serious illness, the first touch is so tender. As the theme transitions to the vocal part, it starts with a bass expression, carrying a serious and oppressed mood. Slowly, joy seizes life. It's a conquest, a struggle against pain. Then comes the march rhythm, a grand army, the tenor's fervent and urgent song. In these boiling movements, we can hear Beethoven's breath. His breath and the rhythm of his inspired shouts vividly show him galloping through fields, composing his music, driven by ecstatic passion, like the thunder god in a great storm. After the joy of war comes religious ecstasy, followed by a sacred feast, then the excitement of love. All humanity stretches arms toward heaven, rushing toward joy with loud cries. This Ninth Symphony achieved unprecedented success. It's considered Beethoven's highest achievement in symphonic music and the pinnacle of his creative career. In May 1824, Beethoven held the first performance of the Missa Solemnis and Ninth Symphony in Vienna.
The scene was so intense it nearly became a riot. The audience applauded Beethoven 5 times.
Remember, in this etiquette-conscious country, even royalty only received 3 applause. The symphony caused such frenzy that many wept. Finally, police had to intervene. After the intermission, Beethoven fainted from emotion and was carried to a friend's home. He slept fitfully in his clothes without eating or drinking until next morning. But for Beethoven, the concert's victory was temporary and brought no profit. The concert earned him nothing. His poverty remained unchanged. In his late years, he suffered from illness, poverty, and loneliness.
Yet he conquered human mediocrity, his own fate, and his suffering.
He said, "Sacrifice all life's follies forever. Sacrifice art for your art. This is God above all." The Ninth Symphony's triumph left a glorious mark in Beethoven's heart. Beethoven's music and revolutionary attitude attracted many followers. When admirers praised his genius, their first thought wasn't music, but faith. Indeed, Beethoven became faith for many. because the 1820s were harsh times when authoritarian politics oppressed intellectuals. People then said, censorship is killing me.
If one wanted free speech and thought, they'd have to go to North America, but no power could restrain Beethoven's mind.
Beethoven was temperamental and never yielded.
He freely voiced opinions about government, police, and nobles, even publicly.
Police knew this, but perhaps saw his criticism as harmless nightmares, letting this brilliant genius remain unharmed. On one hand, his unyielding independent spirit, on the other, his ever celebratory music. He undoubtedly gave faith to followers and comforted the unfortunate through music. He said, "My art should lift up the wretched."
In his final years, Beethoven's music became mocking, defiantly joyful.
This joy wasn't ordinary. It was laughter through tears, victory over pain, a touching smile emerging afterward.
In short, he conquered his fate, fearing neither threats nor death.
Yet death finally came. In cold December 1826, a cold triggered pleurisy after a trip to secure his nephew's future. Friends were distant, he sent his nephew for a doctor, but this heartless nephew forgot his duty. Only remembered 2 days later. The doctor arrived too late and treated him poorly. Over 3 months, Beethoven weakened from illness, enduring 4 surgeries. Awaiting surgery, he calmly said, "I endure patiently, believing every disaster brings some good." That good was liberation, what he called at deathbed, the comedy's finale, though we descendants call it the finale of his life's tragedy. On March 26, 1827, amid storm and thunder, Beethoven breathed his last at 57. A stranger's hand closed his eyes, not the nephew he raised as his own at great cost. Finally, let's review Beethoven's life as a musician. Turbulent, yet gifting the world immeasurable musical treasures. His vast works include 9 symphonies, 1 opera, 32 piano sonatas, 5 piano concertos, orchestral overtures, and violin and cello sonatas. He revolutionized classical music, especially sonata and symphony structures, earning the revered title Saint of Music. First, he subverted classical sonatas, breaking rigid formats and dual-theme conventions. He shattered formulaic rules like the 8-legged essay in music, liberating sonatas into vast new realms. That vast freedom and flexibility gave sonatas the power to eloquently express ideas between movements. Beethoven once said, "No rule can't be broken for a more beautiful effect." In his compositions, he loved using dissonance, bold experiments that caused reactions back then. For example, in his first symphony, young Beethoven used an F dissonance where strings clashed with chords, creating unique beauty. Also, when composing, he'd improvise countless elements, endless pauses as if he was pondering mid-improvisation with hesitation. He'd even insert long, free-flowing passages within a theme's development, like ethereal dreams. This approach intensified both poetic elements and drama. Ultimately, through free choice of keys and themes and altered development forms, Beethoven transformed rigid sonatas into flexible emotional tools, while preserving unity. But he valued unity not in structure or key, but in consistent mood and voice. In other words, this unity was internal, not external. Content determined form. Romain Rolland summarized Beethoven's life. An unfortunate man, poor, disabled, lonely, forged by pain. The world gave him no joy, yet he created joy for the world. He forged joy from suffering, as his own maxim captures, through suffering to joy, a motto for all brave souls. After hearing Beethoven's biography, what new insights do you have about him or his music? Feel free to share in the comments section. All right, that concludes our reading of Beethoven's biography. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.